I found it. I found another one.
I thought you were asking for it, but then I was like, I just
Yeah, I dug down in my purse and I had. Good afternoon. I'd like to call the Finance, Ways and Means Committee to order for April 13th, 2021. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Representatives Campbell, Camper, Crawford, Faison, Freeman, Gant, Garrett, Gillespie, Hawk, Hicks, Lamar, Lambert, Lynn, Miller, Ogles, Sexton, Shaw, Sparks, Todd, Whitson, Williams, Wendell, Zachary. Vice Chairman Baum, Chairman Hazelwood. Madam Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Do we have any personal orders or announcements?
I had one where my mail went.
Do you want to announce that he was here?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to announce to the committee and to the audience that my mayor, my city mayor, Bolivar, was here. He walked out, but if y'all just give him a hand for walking out, I appreciate it.
Any other recognitions for other people not present? All right. We have 8 bills on our calendar today, but before we get to those bills, I know that many of you are here to hear from our Department of Finance and Administration with the overview of the administration's amendments to the budget, and we will have, following that, a brief overview of expansion request. So we have a lot to do and a short time to do it in. So without further ado, I will remind you, members, that the documentation is on the dashboard, and we will go out of session, and we will ask Commissioner Ely to, the man who needs no introduction, to introduce himself and anyone else that his right-hand person there that's going to answer the hard questions, I assume, David Thurman, and anyone else. So, Commissioner Ely.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman, Chair Hazelwood, and thank you for this committee. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today to present Governor Lee's fiscal year 2022 budget amendment. With me here today, as you know, is our budget director, David Thurman. And I just want to start by saying how much I appreciate the collaborative relationship that we've had with this committee and in this body. And I know that we all come to this advocating different priorities, and I know that each of you in your districts have your own unique priorities. And the one thing that I think that has been great that we all share is to continue the sound management and fiscal stability that we share in our state. And so I'm very, very thankful for that. From a budget standpoint, as you all know, this has been anything but an ordinary year. You know, last June, we were in a very different place than we are today. And I came before you presenting a multi-year budget to get us structurally balanced over that time period. And I'm proud that our fiscal year 22 proposed budget achieved that feat in just 1 year. And so we're all happy about that. The budget amendment before you today, together with the original proposal, is really also a long view budget because of everything that's going on nationally and within the state. Obviously, this budget is balanced, but if I had to use really one word to describe, one phrase really to describe what I think this budget represents, it would be strategic investments. It's also a long view because of the levels of federal dollars that we're going to be receiving into our state. As many of you may have heard from the Financial Stimulus Accountability Group a week or two ago, the state of Tennessee will receive almost $4 million, actually about $3.8 billion in the coming year, which is to be spent through 2024. In addition, our local governments beyond that will receive approximately $2.3 billion that can be spent during the same time frame. So this is very helpful because unlike the past stimulus last year where we had to try to get the monies out the door within a few months, this gives all of our local partners much more time to develop a more strategic and a more methodical game plan. So we don't have to make every decision quickly about how to spend these funds now. Number one, they haven't even been deposited yet. And number two, we still do not know really any of the details as far as how those funds can be spent outside the broad buckets of COVID response, economic relief, and specific categories of infrastructure listed as water, sewer, and broadband. So we were able to be very intentional this past year in spending down the coronavirus relief fund. And once we receive this guidance, which hopefully will be in the very few coming weeks, then we will also put together a very methodical approach and plan to be able to spend those funds. I would say if there are any federal funds that we can utilize to reimburse ourselves from the dollars that we spend in this budget, then the state is certainly willing to do that. We need to do that. Believe me, I want to be sure that we retain every penny of state funding back into the general fund for repurposing next year for the following year that we can possibly generate. So jumping in here to real quickly, let me take you back to what we first presented back in February. These are the principles as this is the same slide I came before you with then that the governor had asked to say we wanted to look at what the guiding principles were budget. And really all of these still apply today. We're particularly proud that we are in a much better position than many other states around the country where we find ourselves. But we are still in some volatile times and we need to focus on preserving our recurring funds and by investing on the non-recurring side of our ledger. If you look at this kind of as a refresh, this is the proposed budget that dollars that we had available back in February when we did the original budget, and we were intentional not to grow the recurring budget too quickly. You'll notice here, as you've seen the imbalance between the recurring and the non-recurring, and to be safe. And I asked our director, I'm not sure we've ever, certainly this amount of dollars that we spent in recurring revenue on non-recurring expenses to be safe. So as you are all aware, revenues have certainly performed better than any of us expected, which is a great thing. But we want to be strategic about how those dollars come into the budget. This is an interesting slide. This goes into really how those funds are coming in. And I know many of you have probably seen some of the presentations by Dr. Fox over at the Boyd Center at UT. He's put together some great economic data, but if I had to pick one slide, this is it that just shows in a snapshot the extraordinary one-time ways that we're taking in revenue this year. Normally, if you're making purchases like cars and RVs and other durable goods for the house, people are spreading that over a number of years, and we get the benefit of that over a number of years from a revenue standpoint. But what we saw during this pandemic is many of you know, were purchases that were condensed into a single year. And we simply cannot count on that being the same case over the next few years. As you recall, I think I mentioned this back in February, boat sales alone went up like 75% last year. And so we certainly can't count on that kind of spending ongoing in future years. Knowing the future uncertainties, I guess we just spoke of, and recognizing that this will be a 2 or 3 year process as all the federal funding unfolds. Here's what's available in the budget amendment. Mainly due to the prudent steps that we took together last year, we have a little over $500 million that you see here that are available for appropriation in fiscal year 22. Specifically, where the bulk of that comes from is through reversion. David can tell you that we typically would revert around 150 or 200 in a typical year, but because of underspending and because of the availability of some federal funds that we were able to supplant with our funds, we were able to revert $383 million this year. And so what we're proposing today really comes to you in the same vein as the budget that the original budget proposed in the governor's initial budget in February. We're not growing the recurring cost of government, but we are focused on making non-recurring investments that the state can benefit from in future years. Jumping into the proposed investments, I'm going to run through several areas and then we'll jump into questions. Getting to those proposed investments, many of you have already heard about this mental health trust fund that will assist K through 12 families who are facing significant mental issues in the wake of COVID. We expect that this will serve an additional 302,000 individuals with mental health promotion, suicide prevention, early intervention services, and direct clinical services. So we're happy to be able to bring that investment back. As you know, it was originally proposed last year. Also, 18.5 additional investment in summer transportation. This will cover the cost of what you passed in the special session this earlier this year. I know that there was a lot of discussion about whether we thought that we could cover that, but out of an abundance of caution, we went ahead and put these dollars in to ensure that we had summer transportation for summer school taken care of. And finally, another $2 million that goes toward the investment in the governor's early literacy foundation that'll provide 4 additional high quality grade aligned books for our 88,000 rising first graders in Tennessee. Looking at higher ed, which was a big focus also in the earlier budget, access to higher education, higher quality career and technical opportunities is of utmost importance. And so the first thing we're looking at doing here additionally is putting almost $80 million to work in eliminating the Tcat wait list. Today, that list stands at about 11,000 Tennesseans that are waiting for the opportunity to further their education. And we certainly should not wait on the opportunity to afford them that opportunity. So this is, you won't see the 79. I know all of you have the schedule or the overview in front of you, I believe. And so you won't see an actual $79 million number on that. There's really multiple line items made up of capital expenditures for renovations and things on the buildings, Also, the need to purchase additional equipment, as well as bring on some additional faculty and personnel to do that. We've loaded into this, you'll see $8 million approximately for personnel. And I want to let you know that we'll probably be coming back next year with an additional 8 million in recurring. I know that we've been very reluctant to add recurring dollars to this budget, but in conversations with THEC and TBR, they've indicated that we need 16 million to do what they need to do to be able to get all of those classes totally open and available. But we need to get the building part first, and we need to get the equipment part first. And so we think we can split that out over 2 years. Secondly, we're proposing to transfer 25 million into Tennessee Promise. This will reduce Promise's reliance on our lottery funds, so that making available the potential, at least, to increase the Hope Scholarship Awards, if you deem necessary, or if you deem we can do that. And finally, we're proposing to add to both the UT and TSU agricultural extension agents. I know all of you are familiar with this program, so this is additional $4 million that is for this great program that will enhance our agricultural resources, including 4-H and many others that you're familiar with. Moving on to safety, our safety personnel, as you know, has worked tirelessly over this past year, and certainly we want to have their backs. Currently, their ability to communicate needs improve. Our state portable radios and our mobile radios are near the end of their life and need to be replaced. It's our priority that any existing units that still have a useful life going forward, that we would utilize those in distressed and at-risk counties. If you recall, the March 2020 tornadoes destroyed the buildings that housed our switching center for TACN, which is the Tennessee Advanced Communications Network. And after doing the after-action assessment, after that, they showed that being able to put more geographic separation and more redundancy in those backup centers would help Tennessee to ensure faster responses and improved outcomes that will save lives. And so we're also proposing the $18 million to do that. Next, the Christmas Day bombing further solidified the need for additional Homeland Security agents. This has been something that we've been discussing with Department of Safety, and we're glad to be able to add these additional positions. And then lastly here, the governor's proposing to have the Department of Safety look at administering a school-age children firearms safety program that would be available statewide across the state. So next, economic development and transportation. There are 3 ECD projects on the overview that you have in front of you that are coming up and are close to being able to close the deal, that we're requesting additional fast track funding for. ECD obviously has been working hard on these, and we'll be able to share additional information soon. But there's approximately 10,000 new jobs associated with these 3 additional funding requests. We've also heard from many of you and also many others around the state on these other 3 that we have listed here. We agree that preservation of our historic buildings across Tennessee help us to show the critical stories of our state. Rather than tax credits as originally proposed, we're proposing a $5 million program that will have a non-recurring investment beyond that for 4 years that will provide grants to assist the development of these historic projects. We're also proposing to add non-recurring funds to the SBIR program. I know we talked about that when we were here before. This is an additional $4 million over the Launch Tennessee recurring dollars that were already in the budget and continue to be. Also, we know from recent analysis coordinated by TDOT that aviation contributes 11% to Tennessee's GDP on an annual basis. And to better support this economic engine, we're also wanting to provide an additional $3 million into recurring dollars for our airports around the state. Finally, I want to say a word about TDZs, development zones, or carve-outs as we know them, of sales tax. I've had a number of conversations with Chair on this, and I know it's had a significant amount of time involved in this session. As many of you know, these started back in 1998. The law has changed 17 times since then. And over the next 5 years, the existing zones that we have will siphon off approximately $580 million in tax revenue. It's always a concern to carve off portions of our state sales tax base from the general fund. It may be fine today because we've got the dollars to do so, but we could be in a totally different position 20 or 30 years from now. What we're recommending is delving into this more during this year and looking at providing funding alternatively through a grant program or something similar to what we do at ECD, so that we would have the time to examine these projects in a basis where we could get more information of their economic impact and would be able to come back and do that in a one-time grant versus a long-term sales tax diversion. Many of these sales tax diversions that y'all are well familiar with have ended up being virtually in perpetuity because they are extended beyond their original time frame. So I'm committed to working with you, Chair Hazelwood, and looking at that over this year and how we can improve upon that process. As we look at the next slide, I've only got a couple more here, is looking at tax relief. The governor feels strongly that the best way we can make the best investment we can make in Tennessee is allowing Tennesseans to be able to keep more of the hard-earned dollars that they have earned. And so we're proposing a 2-week sales tax holiday on all grocery sales, purchases at restaurants, as well as prepared food. So so you'll see this comes to about $100 million that would go back into the hands of taxpayers in Tennessee. Tennesseans are still hurting, and we know that our hospitality industry across the state was disproportionately affected by the pandemic and accounted for the highest levels of economic losses, as I described before. And so we think that this will make a huge difference to put some money back in the hands of Tennesseans across the state. We're also proposing a 25% reduction in the professional privilege tax. That will result in moving from $400 per person to $300. We've had a lot of discussion here in recent weeks about some of the major buckets that the governor proposed in his original budget, and we're proposing to allocate $250 million of the $300 million that we previously budgeted for COVID-19 response. We think that We didn't know the significant investment or the significant dollars that we would be receiving for this kind of effort from the federal government when we put forth this budget. And so we're comfortable kind of reinvesting those dollars in other areas. The governor feels strongly, though, that the investment in broadband and local governments should be maintained. On broadband, we feel like this is just too important of an investment to leave up to chance. We know that federal funds will be available in some form, but we simply do not know what that's going to look like. And we don't want to get down the road a year from now and find that it was too onerous or we couldn't get it done and we've got ourselves a year behind. I certainly believe that we think these funds will be able to be likely reimbursed as time goes on and we get that guidance. And certainly we would look to reimbursing ourselves for this expense and making those funds available next year or the year after back for you to utilize in the budget process. Regarding the local government funding, we feel similarly that we maintain that as is. Local governments have already seen these potential allocations. We know that these funds can be used on water and sewer infrastructure. However, it does not specifically mention roads or bridges or other projects critical to many of our communities. And so what we're proposing is that we kind of put a pause on getting those dollars out, but that we get those dollars out no later than January 22. But after we have received the federal guidance associated with the local fiscal recovery fund, and then we work with you, the comptroller's office, and local government to be able to structure those state funds so that we can ensure that those funds complement what we're doing and are able to be spent wisely with no overlap. And then finally, this is the totals of the budget. If you look at the budget as proposed with the original budget plus the amendment, we're at 42.6 billion. As you can see, the budget from 21 jumped considerably because of the federal funds, the orange that you see there in the middle bar, and these are funds that we continue to receive. We anticipate that we'll continue to receive more dollars, and we anticipate that when you look into 22, of course, this does not show the dollars that we're talking about today that will be coming into the state. And so when we're sitting here next year, that bar will be significantly higher than it is now. So I'm gonna wrap it up here and take your questions, but I'm gonna kind of end with where we started. We still believe that this is a prudent and cautious budget, yet being able to return to many of the priorities and initiatives that we started out with last year. We need to limit our recurring spending since we do not know the sources and available funds that we'll have in the coming year. And, you know, this, as I said, represents growing Tennessee, not growing government through strategic one-time investments. And I think that's the right way to do that. So I very much appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. And we will now entertain any questions that you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. There's a lot of information here, and I know there are a lot of questions. I'll take the prerogative of just asking the first one. On the, I guess it's the fifth slide, when we talk about the agency reversions, that's, as you mentioned, that's a little more than twice the normal amount. Can you tell us just a little more detail about what agencies those are coming from? Is it across the board, or just give us a little more detail on that $400 million?
I'll turn to Dave for that if to add anything on here, but I would say that that most every agency participated where they could. So it is pretty much across the board. There's a number of agencies involved in that, and it's pretty typical. I mean, what you're seeing here is normal reversion, but because of being able to cover COVID and because of the funds that we were able to pull back because of the hiring freeze and other things last year that we saved, then agencies were able to revert more than normal. How would you add to that, Dave?
I would add.
And just for the record, name
Yeah.
and
I would add too that the reversions probably enhanced a little bit from using the federal funds for expenditures and freeing up some state dollars in correction, safety, and health are kind of the extra ones, and everything else is pretty much, as he said, across the board.
so corrections, safety, and health were the primary contributors. Okay.
They were the main contributors that we were able to get some additional federal dollars
funding.
for that helped.
Representative Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Commissioner, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Thurman. I want to go back to your original comments. You started with $3.8 billion, and I don't want to sound too dramatic, but how sweet the sound of $3.8 billion that will be appropriated to the state of Tennessee so the Tennessee taxpayers can receive some of those dollars back. My first question, are any of those dollars matching state funds?
No, sir.
Thank
No,
you.
sir.
Representative Miller.
Madam Chair, second question, I'm assuming and hoping that the Governor Lee's administration, along with our congressional delegations and our U.S. senators, are talking with the Biden administrations on how we can use those dollars. It would be great if we could use those dollars the way we see fit. So is that conversation ongoing?
That conversation is very much ongoing. Thank you, sir. And we agree with you totally. And we do expect considerable communication from the Department of Treasury in the coming weeks. They are scheduled to begin to get the funding out to the cities and counties in the coming weeks in May, as early as May. And so we're certainly hoping that we get some indication from them as to what that funding can be spent on, but we do think there will be strings attached to that. And so we do expect to hear more on that soon, as well as that's over and above, that 2.3 is over and above the 3.8 that you're talking about, that will revert to the state. And as I said, the only thing we know at this point about the 3.8 is water and sewer, COVID, and broadband, and that's the extent of the guidance that we've received so far. I'll remind this committee over last year, in the funds that we got from the COVID, from the Coronavirus Relief Fund, we went through 11 different iterations of guidance about how we could spend those funds. And so we hope to receive more information soon. We hope it gives us as much leeway as possible, as you suggested. But we also know that this will be an ongoing process.
Madam Chair,
Miller,
one,
last question.
yes, ma'am. Thank you. Last question. I'm not sure which page, but highlights ECD Projects, $55 million. Would any of those dollars include the Memphis mega site? Thank you.
Yeah, I can't speak to those. I know you may want to discuss further with Commissioner Rolfe. These are three ongoing projects that they have been working on this year, and they are coming to conclusion and successfully. And so these are additional dollars beyond what we have advanced so far, or not to them, but that have budgeted so far to be able to close those deals. And so I can't speak to the exact deals or the exact companies that those go for, but that information will be available soon, and you can have further discussions with Commissioner Roth.
And Representative Miller, as you know, those negotiations continue while
Yeah.
we're, I've spoken with the commissioner, and we're, very comfortable that we're going to be able to close the deals, but you don't know that until the dotted line is
Yeah.
signed. And so at this point, it could jeopardize projects to talk
Yeah.
more publicly
Yeah.
about locations and who they might be and that sort of thing. So it's just something that we'll find out in due course as the contracts are actually signed. Chairman Williams.
Thank you, Commissioner, for coming, your hard work. I know you and Mr. Thurman get home at 5 o'clock every day.
Yeah.
But I appreciate all you've done for our state and you and the administration putting together this thorough package. I will say it would be unlike the legislature since I've been here the last 10 years if a member didn't try to prod the commissioner as to where the next Ecd project was going to be. But I think they owe it to you to their districts to ask. But I appreciate the work you're doing there. The only question I had is I noticed there was an expansion in line item 54 designated to THEC for the GME program there. I didn't know if that's an extension of existing program or an expansion of it, or is it a new program for residency programs?
Yeah. This is just an expansion of existing. This is a recognition of really how important this is to our state and how far behind we are in trying to get additional slots, especially in the rural areas. And so what we're trying to do is to go ahead and give more people an opportunity for those residencies. And so this is in addition to anything that's happening now.
Thank you. It's a really important part of what we do. We find that studies show that if somebody does a residency in Tennessee, they stay here. So
Yeah.
anytime we can expand residency programs across the state for physicians, I think it's important that we do that. So
Yeah.
that's one question I had. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Chairman Hicks, and then I want to come back to that point. Chairman Hicks.
Thank you, Chair Lady and Commissioner, and thank you
I
again
know
for
where
being
you
here.
are. I know where you are this time.
There we go. Thank you again for being here. And as Chairman Williams said, thank you for all the hard work that you and your staff and team have been performing the last couple of months, actually. So thank you very much. As far as BEP, just looking at the
Dave would say longer than that, but
yeah, I know. I was trying to be.
yeah.
The BEP growth, can we talk about that? I think there was originally $70 million appropriated for BEP growth. Looking at now, it's probably around 8.9. Is that correct? Am I seeing that right?
Yeah, what
Commissioner?
Dave will correct me here, but basically what you've seen here in these numbers is fully funding the BEP, and we had a placeholder of 20 million, I think, in the original budget, not knowing what the exact numbers were. And so after receiving those, the new fiscal note is the 8.9. And so this just represents truing up to get to the actual correct number. Dave, you're not on.
You might want to move to the middle mic. Sometimes that one has an issue, if you don't mind being that close to the commissioner.
Oh, that could be a problem.
No, it's not working. Do I have to answer that? No,
Here,
it's not working.
come over here.
Okay, sorry. For education, there's two items funded for the BEP in the original budget, a $70 million number to fully fund normal growth, And then there's a $20 million non-recurring to fund hold harmless, assuming there'd be an enrollment drop. And so we kind of funded enrollment growth and enrollment growth drop until we really knew. We didn't know when we had the $20 million placeholder what enrollment is going to look like last fall. And so we need more data. And now that we have that, we're truing up to the fiscal note of the bill for the hold harmless bill. So it's $8.9 million. So I'm taking out that $20 million non-recurring cost increase completely and adding it back, the 8.9, and fund it from the cost increase, thinking I don't need to fund both. So, if that makes sense.
Chairman Hicks, did
Okay.
you have a follow-up?
No, that's okay with that one. So, and I know we touched on it just for a second, but all the federal money though is, and I know I've heard it over and over that there's not a whole lot of direction as far as what that can be. What's the time frame? Do we have any timeline whatsoever? When do we think those instructions will be coming down?
No.
Or is it truly, we're just simply in a stalemate waiting on the federal government to decide?
Yeah, I mean, we anticipate getting more information soon, but I also anticipate that information to evolve and iterate kind of like it did. Hopefully, it doesn't 11 times like it did last time. But I think that's the reason I think it's important, and that we're recommending going ahead and moving forward on some of these important programs that we can for broadband and for local government, because I think we can figure out how to work out and complement to make sure we're not overspending or spending dollars overlapping. But we may be waiting and not finding out the answer until too long. And so I think we certainly feel like we ought to move forward. We've got the dollars in this budget to do so, and we ought to move forward and go from there.
Charlie, the final question. As far as the cities and counties money goes, so what's the plan for that? Will there be strings attached, so to speak, I know we removed those last year. What's the plan? I've heard that there may be holding that up until January.
Yes.
I'm not sure I understand
Yes,
that, but
that's, thank you. Good question. As you know, so before the pandemic happened last year, we had proposed $200 million. That was very similar to what we're proposing this year, which is those funds be spended. We've got about 6 categories of infrastructure related, non-recurring kind of expenditures that those dollars can be spent on. And so that was the way we started a year ago. And then during the pandemic, we went away from that and said, just here are the dollars, y'all spend them. This year, because of all the other funding that is available, we're kind of going back to where we were a year ago. But the provisions that we're asking for, any city or county can meet from the standpoint of what they can use those dollars for. They'll all have the ability to fully utilize those dollars, and they'll be used on non-recurring type of infrastructure related type of expenses. What we are talking about, Chairman, is waiting until January so that we can receive that information from the feds as to what they are going to allow their dollars to be spent for, and then that'll allow us to inform what we utilize. That we can work with them on that to make sure we're not overlapping and using the dollars for the same thing. So we think that's a good plan. I mean, it was going to take us a few months anyway to expend those dollars, and so if we can wait until we get the guidance from the feds to learn more about what they allow, then that will allow the local governments to be able to spend those dollars more wisely.
all right. Thank you, Commissioner. And thank you,
Yeah.
Mr.
Thank
Thurman,
you.
for your all's work. Thank you, Chair Lady.
And I'd like to go back to the BEP question just for a minute and follow up with something that Chairman Hicks had asked. Maybe I missed something, but I think there's $70 million that was set aside for growth, and those are recurring dollars that we keep there to make sure that we can cover growth in our districts across the state. we didn't have growth this past year because of COVID. So we're using $8.9 million to offset the hold harmless. But what happens to that $70 million? We're not going to be using it this year. So where is that money?
So let me back up and say, normally when we fund the governor's budget and introduce to you in January, we have a cost increase for the BEP, and it's based on an early guess of what enrollment's going to look like. And then as we have more reporting periods on student enrollment, we get to the amendment and we true that up and based on actual enrollment. So I'm not doing that in this amendment because one, we're not sure how enrollment's going to, how much of those students are going to come back next year. They're being held back, particularly in the kindergarten. So I'm assuming I'm going to need that cost increase in 23. And rather than trying to have a really large cost increase next year, I'm going to leave it there and fund the non-recurring hold harmless from that cost increase.
And then the remainder of that, you're just going to hold in reserve for potential growth in the following year.
That's right. Yep.
All right. Chairman Hawk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we're having problems with our microphones, can we find a couple $100 of non-recurring funds for microphones while we're at it? Gentlemen, thank you very much for your work. I appreciate this, and I know it's a very tactical endeavor that we go through. Tell me a bit on slide number 7 that you've got, Commissioner and Dave, Mr. Thurman, elimination of the Tcat waiting list. Thank you very much for that $79 million investment in that. Tell me what kind of time frame we're looking at. I think that you mentioned $8 million for personnel in year 1 of 22, and then $8 million follow-up ask in recurring funds for 23. As we're looking at the waiting list, are we actually reducing the waiting list time frame, and what is that time frame, Commissioner?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question, and we need to absolutely be sprinting, in my opinion, to get this done. If we've got people who are waiting to get this training, and we've got jobs waiting for them in many cases, then we need to get that done as quickly as possible. So in our conversations with THEC and with TBR, they are very keen on this because obviously they love to get this moving. And so they're proceeding with the planning part of doing this. They'll be waiting on the funds to hit July the 1st. But as I said, a lot of this depends upon getting the space required, and it depends on having the equipment required. If we're adding 10 more slots for welders, then we need that equipment to be able to do that. And so we think that there's a little bit of a lag time between hiring the people to teach and being able to get those other two things taken care of. But I anticipate that we will make a big dent into the 11,000 this year. I'm not going to sit here and say that we'll eliminate the whole list in 1 year, because I think that's too fast. They've already told us that they anticipate that we'll need an additional $8 million, as I said, next year to be able to continue to hire additional people to be able to teach those classes. And so I think it's a 1-2 year process, and hopefully, if we're successful, we've got another whole group of people coming behind that 11 that are going to be trying to get in. So I don't think we ever reach zero, because we want more and more people to continue to come into the process.
Chairman Hawk.
And thank you. Just to follow up, and thank you for building out that infrastructure for Tcat. I think that's critically important to make the next generation successful. So I appreciate that. And we don't want interest to wane over the next 12 months, 24 months as that we get those folks through. Second item on that particular slide there, the $25 million to transfer from the lottery funds to Tennessee Promise. What is the source of those funds? And the reason I ask, we have we've got a piece of legislation that would take the online sports betting dollars, which we're still not at a full year. We're just at 4 months in terms of that. Are we looking at the macro Tennessee lottery funds? Are we looking at the online gaming in addition to that? Because the reason I ask that is the lottery funds are specifically tied by the Constitution to higher ed, but those online sports betting dollars are not. So can we,
Yeah.
has there been any division of those funds in this
Well,
recognition,
yeah,
sir?
This is not the online sports, because since it just came into fruition, we've been very cautious about making sure that we didn't dedicate or allocate until we really understood what that looked like. So this will be out of the original lottery funds, and we feel comfortable being able to do that. And again, this just gets us further along for being sustainable, self-sustainable in that effort.
Chairman Hawk, final question.
Final question and somewhat of a commentary as many of my colleagues are just giddy about the $3.8 billion of federal funds that are coming down. When are we going to be asked to bail out the federal government as the state of Tennessee? That needs to give us, we need to pause as we're looking at these dollars. This is monopoly money. We're playing with house money right now as we look forward. So I appreciate the fiscal restraint that we're using in recognizing recurring versus non-recurring dollars. But at some point in time, we've got to pay the piper. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Leader Lamberth.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And Commissioner, thank you. In a year that there is a large surplus because of the $1.5 billion that we cut last year, I think that gets forgotten sometimes, that we, working with you all in a team effort last year, assumed that there would be no growth. And in fact, I think, many of our conversations, you assumed that, there might even be negative.
Yes,
where we had
did
losses.
assume negative, yeah.
And so, Commissioner, I commend you for last year and all of my colleagues for making the tough decisions to be able to cut that $1.5 billion, and that creates some of this surplus for this year. But the worry I think a lot of us had going into this year, both in the base budget and the amendment, is there would be the temptation to spend an enormous amount of recurring dollars. And I want to commend you all for presenting a budget to us for consideration that invest very heavily in education, in infrastructure, additional rainy day fund dollars, and really getting money directly back to the people, both through the $200 million city and county fund and $100 million of direct tax cuts to Tennesseans to go in and buy groceries and buy food at restaurants in industries that have been hit very hard. And it is extremely difficult to just cut checks back to folks in a year in which we have surplus. But saying that you can go out with your family and enjoy a meal at a restaurant, which, just over a year ago would have been something that we did on a regular basis, but for the past year, a lot of families have not been able to do. And to do that tax-free is a big deal. And so I just wanted to highlight that. I also really appreciate the investment in our distressed counties, and specifically the ag extension agents that we're adding in there, because those distressed counties many times are operating with 2 agents that it takes 3 to get the mission done. And that's both for TSU and for UT. And it will make a big difference in those communities. Last thing I'll mention is the $500,000 in firearms training. We recently had a lengthy debate on the floor about firearms, and I think both Republicans and Democrats alike agreed that we need to incentivize folks to get training. We have a state in which there are a lot of firearms, and folks exercise their Second Amendment rights, but with that comes a responsibility. And to incentivize training, and especially in young people, just this week we had a horrible, horrible, tragic loss of life by a young person who put themselves in a situation where they lost their life. And it happens far too often. And to understand the gravity of a firearm and how to properly use that firearm is critical so that our state can be safer. So I know it's only $500,000 in a multi-billion-dollar budget, but I think it sets the right tone going forward. So again, thank you for the intense focus on non-recurring expenses here, because I hope next year will be even better than this year, but we never know. So Commissioner, just thank you. And I wanted to mention a couple of things that appear to be in this that are a really good conservative way to budget.
Thank you, Leader.
And while we're talking about conservative budgeting, I don't believe we mentioned, but there is an increase to the rainy day fund
Yes,
over and above what the governor originally proposed, and I think that's important.
yes. This
Two,
includes an
because-
additional 50 million. We had 50 million in the original budget that brought it to 1.5, so we're now at 1.55 in that budget.
And Commissioner, can you tell us what the number is that the analyst, the folks who set bond ratings and that sort of thing, what number it is they would like us to have?
Well, we're kind of knocking on the door. We're kind of there. We've been trying to get the percentage up. Ultimately to 10, we're around 9.5 now. So we're close to being where we need to be from the
It's
standpoint.
9.5 with the additional
With the
100,
additional,
that takes us
yes,
to
that's
9.5.
right. Yeah. So we'd like to get to 10, recognizing that this body, is the rainy day fund is by statute the last recourse, and we're obligated to go through every other measure to be able to get there before to balance the budget before touching the rainy day fund. So. But certainly between that now and the 10 care rainy day fund, we'll have now just over $2 billion in that rainy day fund.
Again, I believe that's worth noting.
It is.
Leader Camper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for your presentation and all the hard work you put into this budget and this supplemental to the budget. I want to echo the sentiments of my colleague that talked about the amount of money that we're giving back to our constituents via the tax holiday concept and program, but also to the nonprofits that's doing a lot of the work, that's working with our constituents, that's giving them the wraparound services that they need, that's helping to move our state forward. So I really do appreciate that. Question back to the 3.6 billion that's coming down. My question is there any language in the bill that would authorize the administration to use or leverage any of those funds?
Say that again. That would allow.
Will this appropriation amendment have any language that would authorize the use of any of those funds in this current budget year?
I'm not sure.
Is it the intent of the administration to do that, or just to wait?
It's the intent of the administration to use every dollar of those funds. Absolutely. So what the governor said and what I'm saying is that it's incumbent upon us to use those federal funds wisely and to invest in ways that it gives us kind of long-term ability to be sustainable in areas that we may not be now. And so our full intention is to engage with the FSAG group that we have and engage in the expansion process with this body and this committee to make sure that every dollar of those is spent and spent wisely. So yes, we absolutely intend to do that.
Leader Camper.
Yeah, thank you for that, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate the fact that you still want to have the level of transparency that we had with the CARES dollars and the other funds that came down. But my question is around the bill that we're going to pass. Will it authorize you to use those funds, or will we have to wait and come back with a General Assembly to act on any of that?
I mean, I think we can.
No, so there's nothing new in the appropriation bill to address these new dollars that are coming to us. We're going to use the existing authority that we have for expansion process, which I think we're going to talk about after this hearing. And that allows, as opportunities or we learn more about those federal funds to bring them to you for review and approval through the expansion process that's already in the appropriation bill.
I appreciate that, because I do want to make sure that we are inclusive in our thoughts around how we spend the money, and that, both sides of the aisle and all leadership will be at the table. So just kind of want to make sure on the record that's our plan, and I understand the expansion process, so that's a good thing. A second question, Madam Chair.
I
Just one more.
believe that there's more than two
Honestly,
already
No, that was
been
just,
asked, but go right
but
ahead.
that was a continuation of the other lady. No, this one is really quick. So on line 54, where we talked about higher education and the graduate medical education expansion, do you know if that includes Meharry and Vanderbilt and the relationship that they have and the program that they're doing?
Yeah, I think yes. I mean, the details have not been worked out, but I think our vision is to include everyone that's currently involved in making sure, and there needs to be a process worked out on how those slots are filled, but certainly nobody is excluded.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner, Madam Chair.
Chairman Baum.
Yeah, all right. I think it's zero. Yeah, so I think it's zero. So there's none of these. So we got the largest capital project proposal, but none of those are proposed to utilize debt for these projects. And so we'll actually be going backwards, because as you recall from our conversations last year, we had about 300 or so million of projects that we did bond last year. So we'll be reducing actually the debt service related in this budget.
Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Commissioner, thank you for you answered one of my questions about rainy day fund, but in addition to all of these funds that we're getting, are we still getting our federal highway dollars that we normally get in a just normal year?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Everything that we normally get from Department of Transportation or from USDOT is still functioning on a normal basis, and that has not changed at all with our Improve Act dollars or the funds that we're putting into that. The only thing that's changed is that we are receiving less dollars in the gas tax mostly because of efficiency in the gas tax and less travel a little bit this year. And so you've got a little bit less of those gas tax dollars coming in, which does minimally impact, but does impact those Improve Act projects that the DOT is working on.
Okay.
Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What is the percentage in our normal budget without the extra dollars we're talking here? What is the percentage of federal dollars that we're getting now from the federal government to complete our budget?
I'm gonna let Dave respond to that, but I'm gonna go back to this slide at the end, and I would kind of go back to 20 and say that percentage of the budget would be pretty typical, because it's those were the funds that were coming in prior to the pandemic in a normal budget year. So I would say that's a fairly typical budget percentage from general fund to federal to other. And so, you want to add anything to that? Yeah.
Representative Sparks.
Commissioner Ely, I just want to thank you and David and the administration for, the Tcat. We've got one in Representative Bond in my district, and the mental health area and just criminal justice reform. So many areas I could compliment you, but one specifically is Men of Valor. Just want to thank you. I think it's an investment. It's a successful program. I think they're starting to do one in Knoxville, if I'm not mistaken. And the return is there. So I just want to say thank you for your efforts and we need more of it. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you. Let me briefly mention that this year we went through a process where we had each of those people who wanted to apply or to be able to receive grants from us on that, to be able to work with the department or to look at how they would supplement what a department's priorities and initiatives were, to be able to come alongside a department and supplement the work that we're doing to hopefully reduce the amount of government spending that department is doing, and that we're supplementing it through through one of those agencies. But the idea is to make sure that the work that they're doing is evidence-based, or it's proven to work, and that it complements the work that one of our agencies is already doing. Yeah.
Representative Sexton.
Thank you, Lady Chair, and thank you, Commissioner. My question has to do with, I think it's item number 73, E, on the Sports Authority for the County of Knoxville and the City of Knoxville. I think about it's 13.5 million for a stadium, baseball, I think. It's on the administration budget amendment overview.
Yeah, I don't think it's 73 anymore. I think that's but I know what you're talking about. So go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's so it's 73 on mine. It's the miscellaneous appropriations, grants, and community initiatives.
Yeah.
My question is, I think the way that this works, and I could be wrong, but by the way, I'm from East Tennessee, and I'm glad of any innovative works that comes there. But I'm wondering about the Sports Authority and exactly how that the money is recovered. I think, and you can correct me wherever I go wrong on this, but I believe that there's a sales tax that is collected that is over and above what would have normally come in the prior years. Is that correct?
No, sir. I know what you're talking about now. It is in 73. It's just down. So here's the way that works. What has been proposed, this is what I was alluding to earlier when we talk about tourist development zones or any kind of these carve outs, where we are taking existing sales tax that are owed to the state of Tennessee, and we carve those off and say the state of Tennessee is not going to get these. The Sports Authority, or the Sports Authority in this case, is a function of the city of Knoxville and the county of Knox. And so it diverts the typical dollars that would come to the state of Tennessee, diverts it to the Sports Authority to be able to utilize for that Sports Authority to go build that stadium in Knoxville. And so what we ended up with in this case is, rather than diverting those dollars from the sales tax, they were not in addition to, they were the regular sales tax dollars that we would normally collect if anybody went to a restaurant in that area or at the stadium. And it would allow, it now grants Knox to be able to get $13.5 million to be able to utilize for their effort in building a stadium that will accomplish the same thing. So what we're basically doing is supplementing a grant of 13.5 for the revenue stream of the sales tax for a 30-year period of time, that we would divert to the city of Knoxville or in the county of Knox to be able to go to the Sports Authority to accomplish the same thing. So it allows us as a state to be able to know day one, this is what we're putting into this. This allows them the ability to go and accomplish this. And I really believe it's a win-win for everybody.
Senator Sexton.
Thank you for that. So there is a return on that investment, if I'm correct. You're believing that the revenue increase in sales tax will divert the cost of the grant. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, I think so. I believe, I believe as good stewards of taxpayer money, if we do something like this, just like if we do a fast track grant from ECD to attract a company here with a number of jobs, we need to be doing the same sort of math to ensure that the benefits to the state will be great and will be in excess of the dollar amount that we put out on the front end. So whether we're dealing with a certain grant amount of 13.5 or whether we're dealing, as we have before, with a sales tax diversion for a number of years that goes into that, then we certainly believe, and I think it's been the case in most cases where the benefit to the state's been greater than the original dollars that we put in. So I do think there's a return on investment for doing that.
Representative Sexton.
So 30 years, you're thinking that it'll take 30 years to gain the 13.5 million back. Is that correct?
I think that it depends. It depends. One of the things about these deals, and it's one of the reasons that I'm suggesting we do it the way that I'm talking about with a grant versus a sales tax diversion, is it all depends on what happens on that site. So in this case, you've got the stadium and then you've got the area around the stadium that would have received the benefit of that 2.75% of sales tax diversion. And if you put a hotel, if you put a number of restaurants, if you put a grocery store, all of that mix of what happens there will determine ultimately what we, the state, ends up receiving as a result of that. And so, we're sitting here today, and so we have to make our best calculation using our work. Is Commissioner Geragano here still? Commissioner, I mean, we've talked extensively with Commissioner Geragano to try to get the best information we can to be able to make sure that that is indeed a good investment for the state of Tennessee.
One more.
Last one, please.
Thank you, Lady Chair. So the investment, and I don't understand all of the Sports Authority, so I'm certainly not an expert on it. But if I could say it this way, it's in a grant, it's kind of front loading it and giving the money up front instead of the Sports Authority receiving the money later, going ahead and giving them the 13.5, and then hope over a 30-year period that you'll regain that through tax revenues. Is that correct?
I think that's a great way of putting it. I think it's a great way of putting it. It guarantees they know from day one that they can make the deal work, not knowing what's going to happen over the future. We can take we can take the long look and say we think this is the dollar amount that we think is a fair amount that allows them to move forward, but it doesn't give up the state's sales tax in perpetuity.
Thank you.
And I think another advantage is that, as either the commissioner or Mr. Thurman mentioned, so often these things become perpetual.
Yeah,
And this way, this is a one-time,
Absolutely.
we know what we're putting in, they know what they're receiving, and there's no question going forward, and it doesn't impact future budgets. We've taken care of it
Absolutely.
in this budget, and I think that's,
very clean.
it's a good way to go about it. I've got a question on item 35 of the schedule for either one of you. It says a fast track project and they're spending 35 million, but it says it's 65 million total commitment. So help me understand that total commitment. If we already paid part of it, or are we going to pay the other 30 in
Yeah,
future years?
yeah, that's,
How's that work?
yeah, we've already, you're exactly right. I mean, we've already got 30 committed,
Okay.
and they are estimating an additional 35 to be able to finalize that deal. So,
All right. Well, thank you, Commissioner. And we appreciate everything that is in the budget. I would be remiss if I didn't speak about one thing that isn't. And I know everybody here is very tired of hearing me talk about it. But I appreciate in the governor's original budget that we did just a little bit for our DIDs, for our DSPs, bringing them up to 1050. But I think we all recognize that amount is not sufficient. And I know it's recurring funds, and I know that in this budget, because we have so much non-recurring money, recurring funds are very difficult to find. But I would point out, and with all due respect to my friends in the profession who pay the professional privilege tax, that is a recurring amount of money that we're giving up there that would at least get our DIDS folks another $1 or so on the hour. And I would submit to you that $1 an hour for those people is more important to them than $100 less on a professional privilege tax payment for doctors, lawyers, attorneys, and so forth. So just, again, something for consideration and something that is obviously, I've been very clear about it. It's near and dear to my heart. And I think that is something that we can have hopefully some more discussion about. And particularly, I might also mention that I think 77% of that professional privilege tax is actually paid by people from out of state. So we're giving out of state folks a tax break, and we're not paying the folks who are taking care of the most vulnerable Tennesseans at a level that they can live on. So that's my soapbox for today. I thank you again for being here. Thank you for being patient with our questions, and thank you for all the work that's gone into this and that will continue to go into it as we work through to the final product. So thank you so much.
let me say
Commissioner.
one last thing, and I appreciate your comments, Chair, and I appreciate the work that each one of you put into this this budget. And I know that you've been working closely with your districts, and it's been a difficult year for everyone. And so I just very much appreciate the relationship and the collaborative effort that we have here on this budget. Thank you very much, Chairman.
And I'd like to thank you too for being very open, for listening to me preach on many off-site occasions, and for your openness to hearing, our concerns individually and collectively from this committee. And I think the process has gone well to date, and I have high hopes that we'll continue and we'll get this done. I have a deadline. But
yes, you do.
Thank you.
Thank
now
you.
we're going to move directly to Director Thurman for our expansion request hearing.
I think it's you,
Can you hear me? All right.
No.
Can you hear me? No?
Down.
Okay. So I'm not going to give the overview. I brought Greg Turner up here from our office that has been in our office for a while and has been running point on collecting and distributing and understanding the expansion. So I'll let him walk through those and answer any questions.
We're delighted to talk to someone who understands the expansion and all these additional dollars. So thank you so much. Mr. Turner, please.
Greg Turner, F&A Budget Office. And I think there are 5 expansions that are currently sitting with your committee that there's not been any action on so far, haven't been reviewed. So I don't know if you'd like me to go over each of those or if there are specific questions that you have. We also have agency personnel here as well that can answer any questions that I am not able or prepared to answer as well.
I think in the interest of time, if you could give us an overview of those outstanding requests, then and then we'll take questions from the committee members, and we'll ask committee if you would to hold your questions to the end. If just jot them down so you don't forget them if you have a question about one of the earlier expansion requests. So, Mr. Turner,
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I think the first one is, I think it was number 7 on the expansion request that were sent over. It's for the Attorney General and Reporter. This would, it's a request and expansion of federal funding. This is a 3-year federal grant from the U.S. Department of Justice. And it would be to cover expenses associated with the Project Guardian initiative, which is an initiative designed to reduce gun violence and enforce federal firearms laws in the state of Tennessee. And that's about a $400,000 expansion that would be spread over 3 years. Then expansion number 8 with the District Attorneys General Conference. This is a grant from the Tennessee Highway Safety Office, and it would provide 2 positions each for 4 distinct judicial districts across the state. That would be the 3rd Judicial District, the 12th Judicial District, the 28th, and the 29th.
So that would be a total of 8 positions.
Correct. And each of those would receive an assistant district attorney and a DUI coordinator. And the funds would just go to work on DUI prosecution cases. I think expansion that was number 9.
And this is a grant, so it's non-recurring?
Initially, it was a one-time funds. We understand that those grants would be available on an ongoing basis after this initial grant. So we would be working with the district attorneys to include that in upcoming budgets.
All right, thank you. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Number 9, State Museum. This is an expansion of non-governmental revenue to recognize a one-time grant. Basically, this would help create an online database of Civil War artifacts in the state of Tennessee.
All right, and the next, I believe, has to do with the environment and conservation.
Yeah, I think the next one, environment conservation. This is expansion of federal revenue. This does include 2 full-time positions, 1 recreational services specialist, and then 1 grants analyst. And this funding would be used to provide grants to local governments for the acquisition and development of public outdoor recreation areas and facilities. And this is a recurring expansion.
And finally, I believe we have something from our friends at the TBI.
Yes. This would be an expansion of federal dollars for a grant from the U.S. Department of Justice. This would be used to hire a full-time DNA collection coordinator to add in the resolution of unknown forensic DNA profiles in CODIS. And this would help us solve sexual assault, homicide, and other violent crimes in the state of Tennessee.
Again, it's something that several members of this committee have been championing for quite some time. Are there questions from the committee about any of these expansion requests? Anything you want to hear from the agency's own? Representative Wendell.
Just one question. It may be to the commissioner, I'm not sure, or who's got the expertise. What's the total amount of stimulus money through expansion or other means that the federal government will provide the state of Tennessee as a result of both Trump's stimulus plan and Biden's plan thus far? Do we have the gross numbers?
Defer to David or Commissioner on that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Representative Wendell. I think I'd like to get back to you with a more exact answer. I mean, it's obviously now it's a little bit of a moving target. We had some $10 million odd dollars that came into. We had 2.3 that we have focused on a lot of discussion that was part of the coronavirus relief fund that the state kind of helped administer, but there were a lot of additional dollars that flowed directly to institutions and to agencies outside of that. Then we've got close to $1 billion or so that we got in the next stimulus, and then you've got the dollars that we talked about here today, the 3.8 and the 2.3, and so to make sure we answer your question correctly,
That's fair.
let us do that.
Just one follow-up. The Obama era stimulus, by my calculation, was somewhere north of $5 billion. At the end of the day, is this amount going to eclipse that by 2 to 3 times, or is that still up? Just wait for the final answer, or is it?
Are you going back all the way?
No,
to
I'm
the
saying,
previous?
I'm
Yeah.
comparing it to the Obama era stimulus for the state of Tennessee.
Oh,
They-
well, it'll definitely eclipse those that that era for sure. No question.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah.
Are
Thank
there
you.
other questions regarding the expansion request? Representative Lynn.
Thank you so much. I was looking down when you started, and did you say that the first item has to do with firearms? And if so, can you expound on that?
Yes, Greg Turner with FNA Budget. Yeah, it is to fund the Project Guardian initiative, and I would probably defer to the Attorney General to give some more details on that initiative and how that would be impacted the state of Tennessee. So.
Thank you. Jonathan Scrimetti, Chief Deputy Attorney General. My understanding is the Project Guardian money will be used to enforce primarily 18 U.S.C. 922 and 924. These are the federal statutes that deal with the use of firearms during a violent or drug crime or the possession of a firearm by a convicted felon.
Representative Lynn.
And this money, of course, sits in the Attorney General's office, and it will be expended from there. Is that right?
So it's an unusual grant structure.
Mhm.
It will go to the Attorney General's office and be expended, but it's to hire somebody who's detailed to the U.S. Attorney's office. So they'll be in federal court in the U.S. Attorney's office prosecuting crimes alongside the other federal prosecutors. Technically, they'll be a state attorney, but functionally, they'll be working with the federal government. We received a request from the U.S. Attorney to help out with that. I don't believe DOJ has had a structure quite like that before.
Representative Lynn.
I am not familiar with 18 U.S.C. 922 and 924. What are those federal codes?
So I believe, and I used to be a federal prosecutor. It's been a while since I've used these, but I believe 18 U.S.C. 922 is oriented towards felons in possession of firearms. So if you're a convicted felon, you can't have a firearm. And so there are federal penalties that attach to a felon who has a firearm. And then 924 deals with a variety of uses of a firearm or an explosive device in a crime. So primarily, if you get someone and you're prosecuting for a drug crime or human trafficking or any sort of violent crime, there are additional charges and additional sentencing enhancements that can come as a result of using the gun with the crime.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? Seeing none, well, thank you for being here and patiently waiting through this other information to answer our questions here today.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Without objection, we are back in session. And we do have a regular calendar. We have a request from Chairman Zachary to take his bill up first, so we will adhere to that, and that is
Motion on the bill.
item number 8 on the calendar, House Bill 1233. We have a motion, we have a second, we have a motion and a second. Chairman Zachary, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I have an amendment drafting code 4834 that makes the bill.
Motion on the amendment.
I believe that amendment is traveling.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair. Chair, just quickly, the physical impact on this, it was other fiscal impact because of possible litigation years down the road, but this is the Accommodations for All Children's Act that guarantees reasonable accommodations for all children in our public schools while also protecting the well-being of every child. The legislation removes the burden of stress and removes the burden and stress of accommodation from our teachers, administrators, parents, and students. Once this legislation passes, Tennessee will have a very clear path forward for every school across our state. With that, I'll be glad to take any questions.
Are there questions? for the chairman on the bill?
Question on the bill.
Question has been called on the bill. Seeing no objection, we are voting on House Bill 1233, moving on to calendar and rules. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? If you'd like to be a no, please see the clerk. The ayes have it. Bill moves on to calendar and rules. We're going back to the top of our calendar. And item number 1, House Bill 1286 by Speaker Pro Tem Marsh. We have a motion and a second. Speaker Pro Tem, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This bill concerns the Tennessee State Fair. The Tennessee State Fair and Exposition Commission recently recommended to Governor Lee the Tennessee State Fair should move to the Wilson County Fairgrounds. The governor has put $5 million in the original budget this year, and does the paperwork to make it happen. With that, I'll answer any questions.
Do we have any questions for? Question has been called. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. House Bill 1286 moves to calendar and rules. And thank you for your patience, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. Item number 2 on our calendar is House Bill 784 by Chairman Curcio. Do we have a motion? We have a motion and a second. Chairman Curcio, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Appreciate you taking me up.
And I believe we do have an amendment on this bill.
That is correct.
And the drafting code I have is 06651. Is that what you have?
Let me get there. Yes, it is 6651.
All right, do we have a motion and a second on the amendment? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. Amendment 06651 is hereby attached to House Bill 784. Chairman Curcio, would you like to explain the amendment?
Be happy to. It makes a change to Section 7. It changed the word evidence-based, risk-based assessment to validated assessment. It also changes Section 24 and 25 and clarifies that zero tolerance violation defined by TDOC matrix are not subject to the shock incarceration. The judge has the ability to immediately revoke the probation. This is a topic that's come up in just about every committee we've been in, and this mirrors the amendment that was adopted in the Senate.
Right, so you've heard the amendment and the explanation. We've already attached it, so we're good there. How does that amendment, or would you like to explain the overall bill, please, now as amended?
Be happy to. Thank you so much. Members, this is what's known as, we're calling the alternatives to incarceration bill. So just generally, we all know somebody with a mental health or substance abuse disorder that when they slip up, they wind up in county jail, and it's this endless cycle. We're all familiar with folks like that in our communities, and I've got relatives that are in that cycle. I'm sure many of you do as well. And so this bill is an acknowledgement of the fact that we know that county jail is not the best place for folks with mental health and substance abuse issues. Sure, if they commit a violent crime, they cross that line, then God help them, and the system will have to meet them out the way they do. But if we've got somebody who can truly benefit from a drug court or rehab or diversion program, then we want to make sure that we're not crowding our jails with folks who are simply addicted or have mental health issues. So those are some broad strokes, but that's what this bill does. What I like to say about drug court is the only thing wrong with it is there's not enough of it. So we've seen those veterans courts work. We've seen those safe baby courts work. We've seen those drug courts work. That's what this bill is designed to encourage and to build on some previous success.
You've heard the sponsor's explanation. Are there questions? Question has been called. We're voting on House Bill 784 as amended. Moving on to calendar and rules. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. House Bill 784 moves on to calendar and rules.
Thank you, Chairman Committee.
Chairman Curcio, you're next on our dance card as well. So,
Yes, ma'am.
House Bill 785. We have a
Thank
motion
you.
and a second.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also have an amendment for this one coded 6828.
We have a motion and a second. Would you like to explain the amendment?
Certainly. This amendment makes changes to Section 9. It brings the parole board time between hearings from 10 to 6, except for an offender serving multiple convictions for first-degree murder or facilitation of first-degree murder, in which case the parole board has the ability to extend up to 10 years. Section 11 clarifies that zero tolerance violations defined by TDOC matrix is not subject to the shark incarceration, which is the same amendment we had on the previous bill. And then Section 13 adds aggravated abuse of an elderly or vulnerable adult to the list of crimes that the Board of Parole can use to deny parole for seriousness of the offense. Those are the changes the amendment makes.
All right, you've heard the explanation of Amendment 006828. Are there questions on the amendment? Seeing none, you're voting on the amendment 006828 being attached to House Bill 785. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
The amendment is hereby attached to the bill. And I believe there's a second amendment as well.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct, and that is coded 6874.
We have a motion and a second on the amendment. Chairman Curcio, you're recognized.
Thank you, ma'am. This is a very small change. It deletes the language eligible offender in Section 16 and substitutes instead the language eligible inmate. So change the word offender to inmate.
All right, you've heard the explanation. Are there questions? Seeing none, we're voting on Amendment 2, drafting code 006874. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Drafting code 006874 goes on the bill. And now, Chairman Curcio, if you would like to add any additional explanation for the bill as amended.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I'll be very brief, but this is the Reentry Success Act. So again, if we know that 95% of the folks who are sitting in our county jails and prisons are getting out, the question is, who are they going to be when they get out? And so this bill is designed to help them reenter with a glide path to success on their way out the door, to make sure that we're not just releasing folks back into society that are not ready for that transition. And I do always like to point out that this bill incorporates feedback that we got from Victims Roundtable and so forth to incorporate some of their thoughts and ideas into this legislation, because what we've heard from across the state is that victims want these offenders to get better as well, because they don't want them to create more victims. So,
I would like to applaud you for considering victims' rights. As you know, I have a vested interest in that as well. So,
yes, ma'am.
At least in this case. So, thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question on the bill. Any objection to the question? Seeing none, we're voting on House Bill 785 as amended. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. House Bill 785 moves on to calendar and rules.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and committee. I appreciate your kindness.
Thank you. Item number 4 on our calendars, we're rolling, that's our sponsors asked to roll that 1 week. So we're now on item number 5, House Bill 573 by Chairman Reagan. We have a motion and a second.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Committee. This is a simple, straightforward bill. Essentially what it does is eliminate the requirement for newspaper ads to be published in Nashville, Memphis, Knoxville, Chattanooga, Bristol, Johnson City, and Kingsport when a government entity is created or dissolved and rule changes are promulgated in front of the in front of the Government Operations Committee. It will save the state, according to the fiscal note, approximately $68,000 a year. With that explanation, I stand ready to answer questions.
Question's been called. Any objection? Seeing none, we're voting on House Bill 573. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. House Bill 573 moves on to calendar and rules.
Thank you, Madam Chair and
Chairman
Committee.
Item number 6 on our calendar is, there he is. I couldn't find, Dr. Bob didn't have on his shiny coat. I couldn't find him. We have a motion and a second. Chairman Ramsey, you're recognized on House Bill 241.
And thank you, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. Essentially, what this bill does is extends the Executive Order 17, allowing our struggling hospitality businesses to sell alcohol with the purchases of food if that alcohol is provided having a lid and not a bottle of liquor. It requires licensed selling alcohol beverages to go with food to collect and remit the liquor by the drink tax, which explains the huge fiscal note, positive fiscal note, and authorizes the customers to take home an unfinished bottle of wine that is partially consumed at the restaurant. So pending questions, I will await passage.
I believe we have a question, Chairman Hawk.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and forgive me, Chairman Ramsey, for not coming to you before now, but I've had some concerns expressed that this is going to take more agents for the Alcoholic Beverage Commission. And as we look at the positive fiscal note, $4.6 million year one, almost $3 million year two, and $2 million year three, as it phases itself out, I'm concerned that we're going to have a need for more agents who are stressed right now to get the job done that they need to. So I guess I put the plea to this committee as we have the discussion going forward about the budget document, that we look at the potential need for agents associated with this legislation. I know that as Fiscal Review reviewed the legislation, they did not see a need for any new agents for the ABC. That's a discussion that we can have later on as we discuss the budget. But I voted in favor of this in budget sub. I'm going to vote for it now, but I just want to bring to the attention of this committee that there are going to be agents associated with this new legislation for the ABC. Thank you, Madam Chair and members.
Thank you, Chairman Hawk, for your comments. Are there other comments or questions? Leader Lamberth.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And Chairman, just a statement. I know the reason for this bill and that, our restaurant industry has taken a real hit. I do have some real concerns on allowing for to-go alcohol. Unfortunately, we'll not be supporting this today, but the fiscal note and your explanation understands why this is potentially needed by those restaurants, but it just gives me great pause at just really for what was just said, and then beyond that of just putting an open container in easily accessible area to a driver of a motor vehicle is just a very dangerous proposition. Now, I will say, the executive orders have done that for the past year roughly, and I think the restaurant folks would tell you that has worked out very well for them. I am very glad to see that this bill has a specific deadline on when it will end. I think it's a 2-year kind of experiment to see if they can utilize this power that we are allowing them to have to sell to-go alcohol wisely. And I would ask them to please understand that this is something we'll be watching very, very closely, and hopefully will not turn out in a negative way. But thank you for bringing the bill. I know it is something that the restaurant industry specifically very much needs because they've had a rough year. But I do have some concerns just about the implementation. So I wanted to say that publicly and ask that they be extraordinarily careful about how they utilize this bill if it were to pass.
Chairman Ramsey.
And Chair Lady, I do appreciate the comments and the deep thought. And I do want to make sure that everybody understands that from the conception of the bill, we have worked with the ABC. They actually wrote the amendments that's rolled into the bill, and that helped us make a good bill out of it. And we've discussed that issue. They haven't added agents since 2013. And so, with wine in the grocery store and different things, they have always had that need. And so we feel like this may be an avenue to renew our motion. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Are there other questions? Chairman Williams.
Thank you. Not a question. I do think it's really important for the members to know that this is a project or a bill which sunsets in 2 years. I think it's important that it be said that that is the case, and that we'd have to have further action from this legislative body, and that this is an extension of what has occurred during COVID over the last year. So I think it's important for the record, to say that.
Other questions? Questions been called on the bill. We're voting on House Bill 241. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. Please see the clerk if you'd like your noes recorded. But House Bill 241 does pass and moves on to calendar and rules.
Thank you, ladies, Chairman, and ladies and gentlemen.
Last on our calendar for today is House Bill 78 by Representative Campbell. We have a motion and a second. Representative Campbell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That is traveling, as I understand it, with amendment number 5448.
That is traveling, yes.
This is an administration bill and makes a variety of housekeeping changes regarding the Department of General Services.
Would anybody like to go into excruciating detail about what those housekeeping changes are? The question has been called. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. And House Bill 78 moves on to calendar and rules.
Thank you.
That does complete our calendar for today. Thank you for your attention. I know it's been a bit of a long meeting, but just get used to it. We're going to have some more. But we are pending any further business that needs to come before the committee. Seeing none, we stand adjourned.